let me show you the opening responses that annoy most e4 players. The first opening that is so irritating for an e4 player is the Sicilian defense. And the second one, according to my experience, is the Scandinavian defense, which may also transpose to the Portuguese Gambit. The third opening that seems to give most e4 players a hard time to crack is the Caro-kann defense, and the last one is the French defense. So what I want to show you in today's video is a strategy to avoid all those opening responses that I just showed you, but still maintain the king's pawn game. That is, sooner or later you will still play pawn to e4. If that doesn't happen, you will still emerge with a better pawn structure. And that's why the move that I still recommend you begin with is knight c3, the Van Geet opening. If black plays the second most played move in the Lichess database, pawn to e5, this is when you can go back to the e4, e5 stuff. And now this is the Vienna game, but you're not going to play the Vienna game anyways. So you see, by starting with knight c3, you were able to avoid the Sicilian defense somehow. So from here, if black plays knight f6 or knight c6, you just go knight f3. Turning this into the three knights opening, where we delay the development of the light squad bishop. At least I'm more likely to win a free pawn if black is not careful. For example, if black plays the normal looking move bishop c5, on move number 2, there is this little sacrifice on e5 with knight takes, and after knight takes, you simply go d4. And here theory states black should never ever take on d4, which most of your opponents are going to do, supported by the Lichess database. If you look into the Masters database, you won't see anyone taking on d4 because they seem to know a bit of theory. The win rate for white is 64%, which is huge, against 33%. The problem with bishop takes is black is helping white to be ahead in development, and if black plays knight c6, the top played move in the Lichess database, well, now you just take a free pawn on g7. If queen f6, you just exchange queens and you are up a pawn with a better pawn structure. That's one of the reasons why black doesn't need to take on d4. So bishop d6 is the main line, after which you can now freely take on e5 like this. And after bishop takes, pawn to f4 looks attractive, but your king side will just be too open since you don't have a d pawn. So better play something like bishop d3 in this position. I see people taking on c3, trying to mess up your pawn structure on the queen side, but this is only good for white. Also supported by the Masters database. You can check white has never lost in this position. If pawn to d6, this is when you now castle short. So you have no any weaknesses. Plus, you still have a bishop pair for the end game, and you are ready to play a4 next, whichever plan you come up with. Anyway, back to the three knights opening, where you wait for your opponents to, blunder with bishop c5 so that you can take. If they play knight f6, which is the top played move by the way, the game now transposes to the four knights game. And in the four knights game, I only know two brilliant openings. Number 1, the Belgrade Gambit, where we play d4. And number 2, the Gansberg variation, where we play a3 and then sacrifice our knight on e5. Like we do in the Halloween Gambit. I don't want to repeat content because I made a video about these two openings. For example, d4, e takes d4, knight d5. If knight takes, you simply go bishop d3 or queen e2. For example, queen e2, pinning the knight to the king. And if pawn to f5, you continue putting pressure on this pinned knight. By the way, if h6, you have mate in 2, and if bishop b4 check, you have pawn to c3. If pawn takes, you have bc, and then after something like queen e7, putting more pressure on this knight, you just do this pop, and after f takes, then you go queen takes e4. Castling is too risky due to bishop c4, and then after king h8, you go bishop d3. Then start advancing your h-pawn. So now you know that it is possible to transpose back to the king's pawn game with the Van Geet opening. If white plays pawn to e5, you should be good to go. Now the question that begs to be answered is, what if they play the Sicilian defense? Again, this is kind of a review. I'm not going to repeat content. Yesterday, I recommended a very beautiful opening that has never been seen before, at least on internet, where you may completely avoid the Sicilian defense by playing knight e4. And the purpose of this weird opening is to play the Stonewall attack. How? Say if pawn to e6, protecting the c5 pawn, you just go pawn to f4. If pawn to d5, you play knight f2. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever covered this opening on YouTube. So you can watch my yesterday's video and learn more about this. You're just going to be playing the same things over and over. It's like a system. If black attacks your undefended pawn on f4, well, you just play e3. If black plays knight c6, well, you just play knight f3. If bishop d6, well, you go pawn to e3, defending your pawn. And we saw that e5 is always bad because at the end of the day, it is black who is going to remain with an isolated pawn on d5. The bishop is under attack and the pawn. If pawn takes, you're going to take back. If bishop d6, you can still take back just to simplify the game. So that after this, you first of all get rid of your light squared bishops and then you cast a shot if you want. Yes, it looks like we have an isolated pawn as well, but we can easily exchange that pawn, right? And we have a semi-open file for our king's rook and more pawns on the queen side. So this will be a very great game for white. So e5 is bad and Stockfish doesn't even recommend it. The move you will see most of your opponents playing is knight f6. And now this is when you go the Stonewall way. If pawn takes, you just take back like that. If queen c7, you have g3 or knight to h3 or even knight e5. Anything that makes sense. After castle shot, you can now go pawn to c3 and put your dark squared bishop maybe on e3 if you want, kind of the Stonewall, and you won't even see a lot of your opponents taking on d4. They play all sorts of moves like castle short so that you go pawn to c3. This is the Stonewall attack with an improved queen's knight on f2. Bingo! So if you want to learn more about my elbow Stonewall, simply watch my yesterday's video. And now we are remaining with the Scandinavian defense, the Caro-kann, and the French. For those of you guys who still want to play pawn to e4 on move 1, that's fine, but you may run into the Scandinavian defense. What do? Well, e takes d5 is the main move, but if you really want to avoid the Scandinavian defense completely, just transpose this back to the Vanguard opening with knight c3, asking black to advance his pawn, which is the top played move, by the way. After you play knight c3, they are going to play d4. They don't really take. And if you want to know what to do against pawn to d4, you can watch the video that has popped up in the card above where I was covering the Vanguard opening. But just to highlight something very quickly, after d4, you go knight ce2, and after pawn to e5, you don't want to play knight f3 first before black plays pawn to c5. So you go knight g3, and after pawn to c5, which is the top played move, that's when you go knight f3. So this is just the reverse Nimzowitsch defense where you can put your light squared bishop on c4, or you play bishop b5, which is my favorite, because at the end of the day, you just want to mess up black's pawn structure on the queen side like we do in the normal Nimzowitsch defense with black pieces. And then you go pawn to d3. Then after knight f6, you castle short. If they castle short, you go pawn to b3, not allowing pawn to c4 to happen. If bishop g4 comes, you always have pawn to h3. Bishop h5 is bad due to bishop takes, and then knight takes a free pawn. So they most of the times play bishop e6, after which you can now go knight h4, because you would love to put your h knight on f5, the juicy f5 square. And if black thinks he can win a free pawn by sacrificing his knight due to this, well, you just go ahead and take that knight, and after queen takes h4, you will just end up winning a free piece, the bishop. Anyway, so this is just like the Nimzowitsch defense, now with white pieces. So this is one way of avoiding the Scandinavian completely. In fact, even if you start with knight c3, you will always see your opponents playing pawn to d5, because that's the top played move in both the Masters database and the Lichess database, as you can see. So pawn to d5 is what everybody will play, and then you go pawn to e4 in this position because you want to take this time. And you know what to do if pawn to d4 happens. If pawn takes, well and good, you just take back. And there's this funny line where if black plays the top played move in the Masters database, knight d7, like the couple variation of the Caro-kann, you now go knight g5, moving the same piece twice in the opening stage. Yes, in 2024, we do break all opening principles. Anyway, if pawn to h6, black is dead due to knight e6, trapping the queen. And if pawn takes, you have mate in two like this, pop, pawn to g6, queen takes g6, mate. So this is another way you can transpose the Vanjit opening to the Scandinavian defense. e4, d5, then knight c3, or the other way. Again, if pawn takes, you just take back. Instead of knight d7, which most advanced players play in real tournaments, the move you're going to see oftentimes is knight f6. And if you watched my first Vanjit opening, I recommended to play bishop d3 so that after knight takes, you put your light squared bishop on f3 and then put your king's knight on g3. This is okay, but the main move I recommend in today's video is knight takes f6, where black takes back with the e-pawn. And this kind of looks like the Tartakov variation of the Caro-kann. The only difference is black's c-pawn is still on c7. In the Caro-kann, this pawn is on c6 by this time, and our d-pawn is usually on d4. So that's the only difference. From here, the plan is very simple. Just pawn to d4. After bishop d6, you develop both your light squared bishop and your dark squared bishop on these highlighted squares. So you go bishop d3, and after castle shot, you sacrifice your no, I'm just joking. You go bishop e3, pop. The move bishop e3 also prevents black from playing pawn to c5 because you're just gonna take that to be a free pawn. After rook e8, you have an option to develop your queen on d2 and castle long, then start attacking on the king side with all your pawns, or just play knight e2 and then castle short. That's optional, but you see, I'm a bit crazy. There's another line that I'm studying beginning with the move bishop c4. Of course, after taking the knight, say knight takes f6 and after pawn takes, instead of playing pawn to d4 and bishop d3 later on, I first go bishop c4. And the plan is to open up the position and play actively. For example, after bishop d6, the top played move, I now go pawn to d3 if I want to avoid c5, or pawn to d4. If I want to open the position. After castle short, I go knight e2. If rook e8, I can castle short if I want, or just go bishop e3. The problem with bishop e3 is black can play bishop f5, so you always need to keep this in mind. I'm interested in pawn to c5, which looks more challenging. After this, just go bishop e3. The idea is, if pawn takes, like this, you just take back with the knight and continue playing an open position. You see, bishop d3 is okay, but what are you doing along this diagonal? You're not just going to mate black on h7. So I find bishop c4 to be more active. So after pawn to d4 and castle short, the other line I would play is pawn to h4. Yes, allowing rook e8 check to happen so that I can go bishop e3. And I'm doing this to intentionally invite pawn to f5 so that I can go knight f3. They love playing f4, thinking they are going to win a piece, but here I can simply go knight g5. If pawn takes, I have bishop takes, and after king h8, I have queen h5. It's very difficult for black to continue, playing this position. In fact, I'm just going to win the rook with my king. At the moment, after knight takes and pawn takes, I still like bishop c4, and after bishop d6, instead of playing d4, I prefer going pawn to d3 so that I don't have to worry about c5. And if castle short, I go queen h5, just playing actively. If rook e8 check, I always have bishop e3. This time if pawn to g6, I can even sacrifice my bishop like this, pop, so that after king takes, I walk away with 3 pawns for a piece. I would play this the whole day. By the way, note how king f8 is not even good enough. First I can take, but castle long is more solid because I'm just one move away from mating. So if pawn to g5, I have queen h8 check. Black shouldn't play king e7 because I'm just going to get closer and closer to the kingdom of Babylon. If king e6, I can even go knight f3. I just need more pieces. Maybe this is coming, and so at an expense of a piece, I'm exposing my opponent's king and winning as many pawns as I want. So it's not about how many pieces you have, it's all about how many active pieces you have, which is the case in this position. Now, speaking of the Caro-kann defense, after you play knight c3, there are very little chances that you're going to see pawn to c6. Even if your opponent is a Caro-kann expert, because they just don't know what is happening yet. You can see in the Masters database, there is no any top player who plays pawn to c6 here. Pawn to c6 is like the last move that people play. So if you want, you can transpose back to the normal Caro-kann defense, or again, try my elbow line, where you play the London or simply the Stonewall attack. I mean, so it is possible to play the London even against the Caro-kann setup when you begin with our Van Geet opening. For example, you go pawn to d4 and after d5, you don't play pawn to e4 because that will transpose to the Caro-kann, so you surprise your opponent with this move, e3. That's if you want to play the Stonewall. After knight to f6, the top played move, you know they may want to play knight e4, so you go bishop d3 to overcontrol the square. I don't know why most people play bishop g4 here. First you have pawn to f3. If bishop h5, you have knight ge2. And after something like bishop g6, you go pawn to h4 right away. If knight b d7, you go pawn to h5. Looks like black can win a pawn here, but you have knight f4 and there's real trouble. By the way, most of your opponents won't see this little trap where you sacrifice the h pawn so that you can create this tactical shot. If bishop g6, the point is you take with your knight, and after f takes g6, you don't start with bishop takes. You want to sacrifice your rook because there's nothing that black can do. Black is going to lose a free rook in this position. If rook takes or knight takes, by the way, you have mate in 1. So this was all against the Caro-kann where black rushes out with bishop g4. So clearly we see that bishop g4 doesn't work against our Van Geet opening. You won't see this anywhere, by the way, so be sure to subscribe. The move you're more likely to see if you're playing against an advanced player is pawn to c5. But even after this, you can just go knight f3, because if c4 happens, you always have bishop e2. This time if bishop f5, you have knight e5, and once again you are going to play your Stonewall attack. How do you break this pawn chain? Well, you begin with pawn to b3 and then take. Later in the game, if black plays pawn to b5, you go pawn to a4 and then take. At the end of the day, you're going to dominate the queen side. After bishop d3, if pawn to e6, you can still go knight f3 if you want, but I find pawn to f4 more solid. And then at the end of the day, this will just be a normal Stonewall game with your queen's knight on c3, which is one short for due to pawn to c5. But after c5 and c4, you can always play bishop e2 yourself. You can also play bishop f4 in this position, kind of the London system or the Jobava London system. So this is just a way of avoiding the Caro-kann defense with the Van Geet opening. If knight f6, you go pawn to e3. Yeah, they play bishop f5 here before you play bishop d3. Nevertheless, you can still go bishop d3 if you want, and then exchange bishops. If bishop g6, again you rush with pawn to h4. And I've seen people playing knight b d7 in this position. Remember our h5 pawn sacrifice, which most of your opponents won't figure out. This move is very good because once again, if bishop takes, here you don't have knight f4, yes, but you can sacrifice the rook because after knight takes, you have queen takes h5. And it looks like nothing is happening here due to pawn to g6, but after queen h2, Stockfish says you have more activity. Not to mention that you're just up a piece. I mean, black has 5 pieces, you have 6. Lastly, even against the French, the Van Geet opening seems to be a stronger approach. Say after pawn to e6, which I doubt if most of your opponents are going to play, because the top played move after knight c3 is pawn to d5 followed by pawn to e5. But if pawn to e6 happens, again you have an opportunity to transpose this to the Stonewall or just continue with the London system. Pawn to e4 is not much of a stretch, but that would transpose back to the French. So let's try this. Pawn to d4. d5. That's what they are taught. And now you can go bishop f4. And just like that, you're now playing the Rapport Jobava system with e6. Black players play knight f6, where you can play knight b5 if you want, the top played move in the Masters database, but there's nothing wrong with pawn to e3 anyway. If you watched my London Wall attack video, this is where you can even combine two openings if you want, the London system and the Stonewall attack. For example, after bishop d6, you don't want to take because black may take back with the c pawn, so you play bishop g3, and after castle shot, guess what? You don't go knight to f3. Whenever you have a chance to play f4, you do that, which transposes the game to some kind of the Stonewall. If pawn to c5 is played, a logical move, that's when you play knight f3. If pawn takes, you're gonna take back with your other pawn. Thanks to the bishop on g3, you won't have to worry about your f4 pawn. You might see queen b6, where they attack your b2 pawn, but in the London system, the b2 pawn turns out to be a poison pawn in the long run in many variations. So you can also go bishop h4, targeting this knight. If queen takes, you have knight b5 attacking the dark squared bishop. If bishop e7, a logical move, you want to go rook b1, right? But that won't trap the queen because black can easily take on a2 after that. So you first of all play a prophylactic move, pawn to a3, giving black one more chance to blunder. For example, if knight a6, maybe they don't want you to win their rook, this is when you can go rook b1 and the queen is almost trapped. If queen a2, you just go queen c1 and on the next move you might win the queen, or probably a bigger piece like this and this. Let me know what you think about these ways of avoiding some of the common openings that we see all the time on chess.com and Lichess. Right, now time for you to go and check out my new e5 defense course, which I have also linked in the comment section down below. And I'm glad to say so far it has received a lot of attention and people are getting it like crazy. So it's an opening response that you try against white's e4 opening. You're going to learn how to play against the Scotch, the Ruy Lopez, the Bishop's opening, 3 Knights opening, the 4 Knights game, the Vienna game, even the Italian game. So it's the complete e5 defense course that I just launched with my team. You better go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.